Hello everyone, I'm Inverse, and after a month and a week or so hiatus, I am finally back from my Christmas vacation. Had a great time. I hope you all did as well. And I am ready to go jump back into some Company of Heroes. Today we've got a interesting take on an older strategy by a very popular player. We have a very fast veterancy build that Aimstrong has been doing a lot recently. He did it in his qualifier run for Sunday Night Fights. He did it most recently in the Game Replays tournament, in the first day of the Game Replays tournament last weekend, and also in the most recent Sunday Night Fight contender bout, which I recommend you guys check out over on kllthdyrctr, that's coh2.org. The replays are up there, the VODs are up there, and it was a fairly exciting series, Aimstrong versus DevM. I strongly recommend you check that out. We'll be seeing a game from that a little bit later on in the show. Right now, we've got a game between Aimstrong, down here in the bottom on Langra, and his opponent, Evil in a Closet, Silence. This is from round 4, I believe, of the Game Replays tournament. And we're going to get things started right there. I remember what the button is. Yes, that's the first victory. Now, as I was saying, this is a fairly old strategy. And actually, before I get started, I just want to apologize in advance if you hear any sniffling or coughing. I'm getting over a bit of a cold. I will do my best to shelter it from your ears, but if I do cough into the microphone, I apologize in advance. Anyways, as I was saying, this is a fairly old, relatively speaking, strategy. It's actually a strategy that was posted on Game Replays. The general gist of it, at least, is a strategy that was posted on Game Replays by kllthdyrctr, a clanmate of mine, some time ago, two and a half years ago or so. Excuse me. And what it basically is a standard opening. The opening is completely irrelevant. We'll see Aimstrong do 2 minor variations on a theme. The main opening is not what I want to focus on. You should do whatever you find comfortable, whatever you find to work on whatever map it is you are playing on. The opening is not what concerns me with this strategy. What I am most interested in is the mid-game, how Aimstrong approaches the mid-game, what he techs to, and then what he techs to after that point. Now, the gist of this strategy, as I was getting to before, is an early veterancy play. Relatively early, not super early, nothing silly, nothing like that, but a fairly early veterancy play with a tier 3 follow-up. Now, this is a strategy that was referred to in its initial publication as the Kansas City Shuffle. So if you have heard of that, you probably have a decent idea of at least the outline and the general principle of the strategy. Now, Aimstrong takes the core of the strategy and refines it with some very interesting ideas, which is what I want to be focusing on in this game. Now, we are going to fast forward a little bit in the early game, because as I mentioned earlier, the early game is not necessarily something I want to be paying attention to. Now, in this game, Aimstrong has a relatively easy time of things. He gets himself in a good position over here on this right-hand side, which is where most Wehrmacht players find themselves most comfortable on Langra. And it allows him to transition nice and smooth into his tier 2, and then later on into his tier 3. Now, if you're familiar with my Build Order Breakdown series, which is a series of videos inspired again by Aimstrong's play, you'll know I speak a lot about denying the American player veterancy. Denying veterancy is a very important concept, especially in the super early game, because the backbone of an American army is the rifleman. You deny your American opponent the opportunity to gain veterancy, the opportunity to kill your units, and the opportunity to deal damage to you, and you drastically reduce the danger that American army can present to you in the later stages of the game. Vetted rifles are probably the best units in the game once they're fully upgraded. And you as a Wehrmacht player should be doing everything in your power to minimize and, if possible, completely eliminate the presence of veterancy on behalf of your opponent's units. Now, this strategy very similarly to the Volksvolk Sniper MG strategy, does a very good job of that. Now the Volkswagen Sniper MG strategy performed that function by integrating a very early sniper and using that sniper to deal a lot of the manpower damage in the early game. Because of course a sniper doesn't give any veterancy unless it's killed. And a sniper is a fairly difficult thing to kill. In a good player's hands, well microed, a sniper should probably never die. And it was that idea that Volkswagen Sniper MG was primarily built around. Now another one of Aimstrong's relatively new strategies, the 4-Pio Blitzkrieg strategy, that I went over it a few episodes ago, I believe. This is StratTalk, by the way. I completely forgot, I believe, to introduce that. But that's us, yay, woo. But yeah, the 4-Pio Blitz strategy is also a strategy that excels at denying veterancy because of the heavy reliance on support units. We have MGs, we have snipers. Neither of those die very much, and it's the dying that gives your opponents veterancy. It's the Volk squads that are going to feed your opponent vet in the early game, because in order for them to do damage, they have to take damage too. An MG doesn't really take that much damage. Unless you get flanked, an MG in a straight-on engagement is really not going to take that much damage and is probably never going to die. Now as we see right here, a fairly standard Volkswagen MG sniper, slight variation on the Volkswagen Sniper MG in the early game here. Nothing too special. We got a very quick tier 2. We're going to see the Krieg barracks go up in no time at all. And we have a fairly standard territory distribution map control for Aimstrong right now. Nothing too entirely impressive on either side. We have a lot of VP control for silence right now. And seeing as this is a tournament game, that's definitely important. And even in normal games, that is absolutely something that you as a Wehrmacht player, and really as any player, should keep in mind. And as you see right now, Aimstrong beelining it for the VPs, capping this one right here and capping this one right here. However, the follow-up from the early game is completely standard, nothing special at all. We're going to see tier 2, we're going to see some tier 2 units. It's not this aspect of the game that I find particularly interesting. That aspect is going to come in a little teeny tiny bit of time when we get some tier 2 units up on the field and we start pumping out the veterancy. And the veterancy is what makes this strategy so interesting and so compelling to me. Now initially, in its initial rendition, kllthdyrctr had envisioned the relatively early vet, and by relatively early vet I mean generally speaking after 2 grenadiers. Of course, we're going to see in the next game that is not necessarily a hard and fast rule. Excuse me. So all I really want to say in terms of guidelines for when you should be getting veterancy is get a few tier 2 units, then get your vet. If you feel like you need to delay your vet a little bit to get an extra tier 2 unit, so be it. If you feel like you could perhaps benefit from getting that veterancy a little bit earlier, absolutely go for that as well. There's no hard and fast rule for when you should begin to tech to veterancy in this strategy. The main indicator is before you get tier 3. Because as I was saying before, the initial intention of the veterancy in kllthdyrctr's first publication of the strategy was to act as kind of a bait and switch, a deceitful maneuver to trick the American player. The thought behind the addition of veterancy to the strategy was in order to coax your American player into over-investing in anti-infantry tech, to over-invest in snipers, over-invest in infantry upgrades, to neglect AT, and then to spring tier 3 on your opponent immediately after the Vet 2 has been completed. Now, Aimstrong takes this a little step further by using the Vet 2 not only as a ruse, not only as a trick, but as a means of denying his opponent both veterancy, map control, and the ability to effectively react to what he is doing. And those are the 3 main things that I want to highlight in this strategy, is the fact that there's a Goliath. That's another That's another fun thing to highlight. But what I was going to say before I got woefully distracted was that this strategy is not only effective in that it forces, or at least if it doesn't force, it encourages an overreaction. Because it does definitely encourage an overreaction. When you see super early Vet 2 and you see a lot of Tier 2 units, you're almost always going to be responding to a situation like that with infantry upgrades, infantry base tech, infantry counters, stuff like that. Goliath, Goliath, Goliath! It didn't even kill anything. That was so disappointing. I was so easily distracted by that. I never see Goliaths in my games. No one ever builds Goliaths, and I don't build Goliaths because I always forget they exist. So it's always fun seeing someone smarter than me actually build Goliaths and have them kill stuff even if they don't kill that much stuff. But yeah, as I was saying, are we going to see the vet? There we go. Veterancy coming up right now. Fairly quick. 10:45, as we see right here, 2 Grands in a pack. That's a fairly standard Tier 2 setup. This is generally when you see Wehrmacht players in normal situations begin their tech to Tier 3. Usually we see a tech to Tier 3 before veterancy in order to very quickly counter any sort of sniper play, bars after motor pool, which is what Silence elected for in this game. However, if we look down at the fuel right now, we have Vet 1 coming up. If we look down at the fuel, this is a common occurrence in a lot of Wehrmacht games, is a surplus of fuel in the mid-game. Wehrmacht strategies in general are very manpower intensive, very manpower dependent. American strategies as well, but you see a lot of late game and even mid-game Wehrmacht players floating a lot of manpower. And this strategy mitigates that to a certain extent by giving you something to spend that fuel on in the mid game before you're teching to your later game Pumas and Stugs and maybe even Ostwinds, stuff like that. And the main strength of this, and the reason why Aimstrong almost always follows this up with Tier 3 rather than Tier 4, is the fact that you do not need a fuel bank in order to actually tech to Tier 3. You need a fuel bank in a lot of situations to tech to Tier 4 because the Tier 4 building is 60 fuel. An Ostwind is 40 fuel, which is fairly cheap, but a Panther is 110 fuel. A Panzer IV is 80 fuel. These are very expensive units, and you need to build up over a period of a few minutes at least the fuel base to actually support constant production out of a Panzer command. Whereas you can very easily and very efficiently support constant production out of a Sturm Armory simply by using the fuel income that you have when you're building it. You don't really need a bank. You can build a lag spike. There we go. You can build a Sturm Armory and get yourself down to 0 fuel, and by the time that Sturm Armory is up, if you have a decent bit of map control, in this case we have a pretty decent bit of map control by Aimstrong right now, you can very easily begin production of Pumas and begin near constant production of Pumas and Tier 3 units, while also gaining the benefits of your Vet 2. Because when you think about it, the only really negative downside to Vet 2 on Wehrmacht infantry, and specifically Grenadiers, is the fact that a sniper will never ever miss. A sniper will never miss a Grenadier with elite armor. Even on retreat, a sniper will always get a kill when it takes a shot at a Grenadier with elite armor. Of course, Flamers ignore elite armor. That's not necessarily a negative. It's more the fact that elite armor, it doesn't really give benefits to Flamers. It's not necessarily detrimental in the face of Flamers either. So really the only major downside is the vulnerability to snipers. Now Aimstrong mitigates this to a certain extent by always making sure he has a sniper in his early game. He loves his sniper openings, and even if he doesn't do something like Volkswagen Sniper MG, something that extreme, he always makes sure he has a sniper in his Tier 1 composition. If that means getting a sniper after 3 Tier 1 units, if that means getting a sniper after 2 Tier 1 units, 4 Tier 1 units, whatever it may be, Aimstrong almost always has a sniper in his unit composition, and that allows him to fairly easily react to the most common counter to what he's doing right now, which is very fast tier 2 and very fast veterancy, which is a sniper, which even with tier 3 on the field, which is what we see coming up right now fairly quickly, not as quick as if he would have skipped the veterancy, of course, but a 2 or 3 minute delay, which he traded in exchange for more efficiency and more effectiveness on his infantry. Now, as we see, we do have the Sturm Armory up. Now, one omission that Aimstrong has made to this strategy that the original rendition of the strategy suggested was an early med bunker. Now, there are a few reasons for this. Of course, as we see down here in the munitions income area, we haven't had many mines in this game, not many at all. We've had a few. We have had Goliaths. That one actually did something. Yeah, we've had a lot of Goliaths, which is an interesting way to spend your munitions. Munitions expenditure in this strategy pretty much adheres to general conventions of Wehrmacht play. You want to be laying mines. You want to be getting minesweepers, getting Gren upgrades when you need to, saving some for Faust, stuff like that. We have now 2 American snipers, and this is the overreaction that Aimstrong was absolutely banking on and absolutely hoping for. This is what the follow-up is designed to punish, and this is why it's generally speaking almost always safer to follow up with something like this over continual pressure with Grenadiers, continual investment in Grenadiers, because excuse me, there was the cough in the microphone. That was number 1. Hopefully that's only number 1. But yeah, as I was saying, we missed a counter snipe. It's very risky putting all of your eggs in one basket, so to say, as the expression goes, and investing purely in Grenadiers, because a transition like this, double sniper, is absolutely amazing against Grenadiers. It's absolutely terrible against Pumas and against any sort of tier 3 follow-up. As we see behind this Puma aggression, forcing our American player into his base, we have Aimstrong capping up the entirety of the map, applying a lot of pressure and making it very difficult for his opponent to advance at all at this situation, and or at this point in the game rather. And from here, the game is pretty much over. Now, the main kind of idea I want to convey in this strategy is the ideas behind delaying and denying your opponent vet, the advantages of the very quick vet 2, not only in terms of denying vet and reducing vet, but in terms of giving your infantry more staying power and giving your infantry parity more quickly against your opponent's bars, bars being a fairly common follow-up, and almost always you will be facing bars at some point. It's an upgrade akin to getting a triage center in a sense. It's relatively cheap. Fuel is not really a concern in a situation like this, simply because you're following up with a tech route that doesn't really need a large fuel bank. You're following up with a tech route that you can pretty much tech to with bare minimum amounts of fuel. And it's a strategy like that, and it's a situation like that. I didn't notice that last time. That was awesome. But yeah, it's a very cost-effective strategy. It's a very limiting strategy in terms of how your opponent can react to it, and it provides you as the Wehrmacht player with a lot of options and a lot of flexibility. Now, as we're going to see moving on into Game 2, things don't necessarily always go according to plan and as smoothly as this game, and we'll see how Aimstrong reacts to that. I'll see you guys in a bit. Alrighty guys, welcome back. Took a sip of water. Hopefully the excessive coughing into the microphone will be reduced. Anyways, here we are in Game 2. Got Aimstrong over here at the top of Simois, and his opponent will be Aljaz Fireball. This is from the very first Sunday Night Fights qualifier, the final round between Aljaz and Aimstrong. Let's get things started right now. Actually realized in the break there that I began to discuss the importance of Aimstrong neglecting to build a med bunker, and then was summarily disrupted, had my concentration absolutely shattered by the likes of the Goliath. So I'll just take a little bit of time in the downtime here at the beginning of this game and just kind of talk about the significance of deciding for a med bunker, deciding against a med bunker, and why it relates to this strategy in particular. Now, many tier 2 strategies, and indeed many of the strategies I feature on my channel, at least Wehrmacht strategies, explicitly recommend a med bunker in the mid game. Usually after, excuse me, usually after, the water didn't really help apparently, but after a Gran and a pack, usually after 2 tier 1 units, that's generally speaking the time when you see a lot of Wehrmacht players putting up their med bunker. If not then before tier 2 entirely, against some heavy aggression, heavy bar plays. Now, in a strategy like this, the med bunker gives or depletes 2 resources that we really desperately need. Those are, of course, manpower and munitions. Now, what the early veterancy does mainly in terms of negative impact on the Wehrmacht army itself is a reduction. Excuse me, my goodness, I'm all full of terrible sounds today. I'm just gonna pause that and interrupt myself once again to say this is absolutely amazing. This is put here to reduce and limit a jeep's range of motion. You'll notice a infantry squad can actually very easily traverse this. Any infantry squad. A jeep and a bike, however, can't make it through here. Aljaz very much likes his early jeeps. Aimstrong not so big on the early bikes. This is I don't know, I think it's pretty cool. Maybe I'm just geeking out over nothing, but that is very interesting to me, and I really like plays like that. Anyways, as I was saying about the med bunker, finally let's finish this point. The med bunker, it's 150 manpower, and while that might not seem like a lot, keep in mind we're investing a lot of manpower in veterancy, and a lot of manpower in veterancy means we're going to have a reduced map presence in terms of less infantry units on the field. We have the 100 manpower for the Kampfkraft Center, of course. We have the 100 manpower for the initial upgrade, the Vet 1 upgrade, and we have the 300 manpower for the Vet 2 upgrade. If we add all of that together, then we have the Jeep. But if we add all of that together, we come up with 500 manpower that you otherwise wouldn't really see spent on tech that early in the game. And that translates into almost 2 full Gren squads if we factor in building a med bunker anyways. Now if we take out that med bunker, that 500 manpower suddenly shrinks to 350. And all of a sudden that 2 Gren squads is 1 Gren squad. 1 Gren squad and a reinforcement or 2. And that's a lot easier to manage, both in terms of how you can respond to what your opponent is doing and what your opponent can do to punish what you've done, which is jump up very quickly in tech at the expense of some manpower intensive units and some units that will gain you field control, like field presence and map control. Of course, the munitions is less of a big deal. If you're going to go the Goliath heavy route like we saw Aimstrong do in the previous game, it absolutely helps to not have that extra 50 munitions being dumped into the med bunker, and instead having it invested in a slightly quicker Goliath. Of course, in a more standard situation, that's 2 extra mines that you can plant in order to make up for that deficit that you've put yourself in by sacrificing some units in exchange for earlier tech. Now, of course, as I mentioned in the previous game, that earlier tech has a lot of very tangible, very useful benefits the later into the game you go. But the vulnerable point in this strategy lies right when tier Vet 1 infantry has finished and right when Vet 2 infantry has begun, because your entire investment pretty much has not paid off at that point. It absolutely has not paid off. You've invested a lot of money. You have your Vet 2 on the way but not yet kicked in. You have Vet 1, which isn't really all that useful in a straight up engagement. And you're waiting for things to happen. You're waiting for units to be built, for upgrades to finish. And it's at a point like that where your opponent, if he times something correctly, if he has his tech in order, is absolutely able to deal a significant amount of damage to you. Now, as we see, Aimstrong's been strung out a little bit on the map right here, fairly spread apart. He has a few units over here, he's got his sniper and a few pioneers over here. He's been cut off from his all-important munitions point. He's taking a lot of damage up here, though he is probably going to kill this engineer. He does have his tier 2 up, as we see down here. Once again, 4 tier 1 units, once again a sniper. The two kind of standard themes. Of course, having 5 tier 1 units, absolutely not a problem at all. You just have to realize what you're giving up in exchange for that 5th unit. That you're going to be slightly more susceptible to M8s, slightly more susceptible to earlier tech, but you're going to have slightly greater security in the early game. And slightly greater map presence and stuff like that. Boom. 1 Jeep down. 2 Jeeps. Is that 2 Jeeps down? Or is that only 1? I think it's only 1 Jeep down. Oh well. I can't find the other one even if he does exist. Ah, run away, folks. Run away, folks. Run away, folks.
We are losing ground.
But yeah. Aimstrong is trying to push back onto this right-hand side. You'll notice we have a standard timing on the Krieg barracks. We're going to see a slightly different timing on the veterancy this game. And the main reason for that is the situation Aimstrong finds himself in right now. He's relatively behind in terms of territory, as you can tell. He doesn't really have the resource points that he really wants at this point in the game. And he's lost a decent... Excuse me. He's lost a decent amount of manpower as well. He's had to reinforce these Volks a great deal, and his opponent has actually done a fairly good job of being aggressive intelligently and pushing Aimstrong off the map, as we can see from the tactical map right here. Only 2 resource points in Aimstrong's possession at this stage in the game. And in a situation like this, as I mentioned in my playing from behind series, or video rather, it's counterproductive to play a standard game from this point. You don't really... Oh, that was the 2nd Jeep. Ha ha ha. I forgot about this one. But yeah, you don't really want to be playing a completely standard, completely normal game in this situation. And as we see right here, very early at least relative to our other game, Comcraft Center, coming up right here. We only have 1 Gren on the field right now. We have 2 Volks still. We have this MG. We have a sniper as well, of course. But we don't really have the map presence that Aimstrong undoubtedly would like in this situation. Now, the counter, the kind of trade-off to this super early veterancy would be an increase in Grens and boosted Gren production for a time, and slightly later veterancy. However, by getting this veterancy even earlier than normal, Aimstrong is able to maximize the cost effectiveness of his infantry and limit his manpower drain going forward, which is a very important thing for him to do if he wants to pull back into this game and to pull back into map control and into territory. He's attacking into enemy territory, and in that situation, you're generally speaking going to be taking more losses than if you were, say, defending from a fortified position while in cover and stuff like that. Now, with the veterancy, however, Aimstrong's able to fairly easily mitigate that point, as we see Vet 2 coming up right here. We're going to see a continuation of production from the Kriegbarracks immediately afterwards. We're not going to see a immediate tier 3 tech, which would be slightly too greedy. It would be fairly greedy to say the least, seeing Aimstrong do something like that. But as we can see, fairly good job right now of pushing back into the map. Of course, this doesn't really have too much to do with the veterancy at this point. But what we're going to see in a few minutes is that veterancy finally kick in, and combined with Kriegbarracks production going forward, have a large swell in the aggressive potential of the Wehrmacht army. Because especially against bars and against combined American arms, as we see, we only have grenades right now, but even grenades combined with an M8, grenades combined with a sniper, any sort of rifle upgrade combined with later tech is very difficult for vanilla Wehrmacht infantry to deal with. It's very uncost effective. It costs a lot of manpower to defend flanks against bars without vet, to defend flanks against even grenades without vet, simply because even if you're not taking damage from your grenades, or from your opponent's grenades rather, you're taking damage from having to move out of cover. You're dealing less damage while at the same time taking more damage, because you're forced to relocate, you're forced to move out of cover, and you're forced to react to what your opponent is doing instead of forcing your opponent to react to you. Now at this point, as we can see, Aljaz elected for an M8, and that was the reason behind his reduction in aggression, at least in the mid-game right now. Aimstrong, however, has been able to field a fairly sizable force, does not have a pack yet because of that very early investment in veterancy. We're going to see a pack coming out right now. We do have 2 Grens, however, and in a situation like this, Aimstrong is actually in a perfectly fine shape. He doesn't really need super early anti-tank infantry, anti-tank guns, anything like that at this point, because he has a large number of self-sufficient infantry units that he can put around the map and force his opponent to select one area and focus on that. Because an M8 can't be everywhere at once. And without veterancy, it's fairly easy for an M8 to go one way and some infantry to go the other way, and all of a sudden the Wehrmacht player can't really do anything. He has to prioritize where he wants his AT, he needs to invest in handheld AT, stuff like that. Whereas with veterancy, our Wehrmacht player is able to exert pressure with his infantry and do so cost effectively without having to worry about, hey, if I send a Gren down here, sure, I might be able to cap this point, but if he sends any unit down there to fight me, I'm either going to have to A, retreat, or B, deal as much damage as possible, but accept that I'm going to be losing a lot as well. Because even Grens against grenades, against flamers, against rifles and flamers in combination really do not fare all that well. As we see the pack coming in the middle right here, once again, no med bunker. Saving that manpower instead on extra units because we did invest in this early tech. No tech coming out from Aimstrong right now, however, the map control situation is far better now than it was in the earlier portions of the game. Thanks to his veterancy, Aimstrong was much better able to push forward and be aggressive. Now at this point, the American player has a few decisions he has to make regarding how he wants to counter what it is Aimstrong's been doing, because snipers seem logically in any American player's mind to be the preferred counter and the preferred reaction to a strategy and to a situation such as this, which is exactly what you as the Wehrmacht player are going to be relying on and are going to be hoping for. Because right now, look at what Aimstrong has. He's got 3 Vet 2 Grens right now against rifle squads that don't even have bars. We don't have a triage center yet from our American player. Our American player elected instead to emphasize his grenades and his M8 tech follow-up at the expense of any sort of very heavy infantry counter and any sort of investment in his infantry force and in his rifle force. We saw right there the sniper follow-up, and in a situation like this, we have the tier 3 coming out. Now, I do want to point out that this isn't necessarily a strategy that you want to be doing at all times, irregardless of what your opponent is doing. There are definitely situations where what your opponent does is going to push you off the path of getting early veterancy. Something like very aggressive rifle upgrades in the early game, a very early sniper combined with rifle upgrades, something like that. A situation such as that is a situation where you probably do not want to be investing in grenadiers and in infantry veterancy at the expense of excuse me, at the expense of further tech such as tier 3 or something like that. In fact, in situations where Aimstrong's American opponents have elected for very heavy anti-infantry play, either blindly in anticipation of a strategy such as this, or perhaps in preemptive reaction to this sort of follow-up, we see a earlier tier 3 follow-up in place of the Vet 2. And that's absolutely something that you should be keeping in mind, and you should not ever be locking yourself into, hey, I'm gonna go Grens and I'm gonna go Vet, and I'm just gonna see how it works. You should not be playing that way, and you should not be thinking that way. You should be telling yourself, hey, if my opponent does something pretty normal that I expect, if he goes for a rifle upgrade and then he follows it up with an M8, or if he goes for a rifle upgrade and he's relatively passive about it, and I'm fairly certain he's either, maybe he's getting a sniper, but he's being pretty passive about it, and he's letting me get a lot of map control. It's a situation like that, or situations where, hey, I'm a little bit behind, I need something to get me back into this game. If I just build Grens, excuse me, if I just build Grens and infantry and packs and stuff like that, I've already lost too much manpower. I'm not going to be able to come back. I'm not going to be able to produce enough cost-effective units to counter what my opponent has at any given time. My goodness. You know what? One sec. Pause. Drink. Water. Ooh. Okay, we're good. We are good for the final 5 minutes of this video. What was I saying? Oh yeah, if you're behind in a situation like that, and you need that little extra something to give you an opportunity to get back into the game. Now, it can be risky sometimes. Getting Vet 2 in the improper situations can lead to fairly easy losses against players who know what they're doing. For example, in this situation, if Aljaz had followed up his motor pool play, or not his motor pool play, but his early grenade play with a weapon support center and a sniper instead of his M8, Aimstrong would have been in a lot of trouble. And of course, in a situation like this, that was a conscious risk by Aimstrong, given the circumstances and given what he had to deal with. We had a Wehrmacht player that had been completely pushed off the map, had this territory point, and had this territory point. In a situation like that, you can't realistically and cost-effectively fight against the American arsenal, against what the American player has and what the American player is doing, without simply taking too many losses, taking a lot of manpower damage, and putting yourself in the hole further. Now, by teching to this very quick tier 2, not only does it give you that immediate benefit of cost effectiveness in that early game when you really need it, it carries through the entirety of the game. It's an upgrade that almost every game you as the Wehrmacht player are going to want to be getting. And by getting it a little bit earlier, you are sacrificing a little bit of the strength that you could possibly have in terms of map control and map presence for that little boost of cost effectiveness a little bit earlier than you would normally have it. This game is almost over. As you can see, Aimstrong has absolutely pushed back everything. And despite double sniper play, we have Pumas, we have map control, we have me rambling on about nothing because this is the first cast I've done in a month. So yeah, we're going to call that an episode right now. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you got at least a little bit of something out of this. Even if this isn't a strategy you might necessarily want to try, at least take the concept and the understanding of when you should be or potentially could be getting that early veterancy as opposed to when you should perhaps be sitting back and teching to something differently. Hopefully it helps you out in some way or another. Thank you guys for watching. As always, if you have any questions, comments, stuff like that, post it below, send me an email, send me a message, anything like that. I read absolutely everything, even if I may not respond to everything. I appreciate you all. Thank you all for watching. I am live streaming a lot once again over at Twitch TV, twitch.tv/InverseTV. I'm trying to think of some ways to integrate that into YouTube, maybe do some live recordings from that with constant commentary, more like what I do in these videos, and then uploading them to YouTube. Let me know what you think of something like that. I'm not really sure. I'm trying to get myself some more ideas for content, irregardless of the general strategy talk, stuff like that. So let me know if you have any thoughts, suggestions, what you think about that idea, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.